we're coming on 4 after, so that's been enough moments for everyone to find your place. So welcome to this wonderful afternoon gathering. Welcome to the Daughters of Erietown, an afternoon with Connie Schultz. It's going to be a rich afternoon, and we'll be introducing you to how our presentation and conversation will go in a few moments. But I wanted to begin just by welcoming you to this event. My name is Andy Gaines. I'm the executive director of Ashby Village. We're a community-based nonprofit that's been assisting people to age independently in their homes and building a sense of community and connection for the last 10 years. During the shelter in place, I've been incredibly gratified to see how the depth of community that we've established is allowing us to continue to be with one another, find creative ways to connect online and on the phone, and then also to continue to support our members with lots of different types of groceries and medications and tech support, etc. So really glad to have all of you. I want to particularly recognize this is our 10th anniversary, and on Wednesday of this week, the 29th, at 5 p.m. for a half hour, very quick, we're going to be celebrating this 10th anniversary. We'll be premiering a new film that was made and sharing some words from our members and volunteers and sponsors, and just a lot of, it's going to be a really rich half hour, and then we'll toast. So please join us for that. You can see the information on our website. Last month, the Ashby Village Board of Directors met, and we committed ourselves to promoting greater inclusion in our community and challenging the institutional racism that impacts our village and the greater community, I think our country. They've initiated a process of self-reflection and a rigorous assessment of our values, practices, and strategies of Ashby Village. We treasure the socioeconomic, racial, and cultural diversity in the East Bay. We want our services and programs to be accessible to a broad range of peoples. Accordingly, several years ago, Ashby Village launched our It Takes a Village subsidized membership program, which provides reduced fee membership to people who cannot afford our standard rates, and to allow us to create a more diverse and community. So membership dues cover approximately 60% of the revenue needed to operate our village, and with the balance comes from individual donors. So today's event is free. We're really delighted to be sharing a lot of wisdom and wonder and beauty, but we do rely on donations in order for us to present programs such as this. And so I wanted to just invite you to consider making a donation. You'll see it in the chat bar. It was in the registration link, but please just continue supporting Ashby Village so we can continue providing you with such rich programs. So with that, I'd like to pass it on to Marcia Freedman, a member of our Ashby Village Arts and Culture team that has been working for the last several years to provide you with such rich programming such as this. Thanks for joining us, and Marcia, take it away.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Andy, very much. I have been a member of this board of directors for 10 years, since the inception of Ashby Village. And 3 years ago, we formed the Arts and Culture team. The other members of this team are Sigrid Duisberg, Betty Webster, Joanne Carter, Irene Marcus, and Rochelle Lefkowitz. And we have been producing 4 to 5 programs per year, every year, for several years now. But given the pandemic and the shelter in place, we've kind of been working overtime, I have to say. And we've got 3 events coming up in August and September. Let me quickly tell you what they are. You might want to make a note of the dates. On August 16th, Troy Duster will speak on the forces reshaping our nation's understanding of race. A very, very important conversation, and I hope you'll join us for that. On September 16th, Fiona Ma, California State Treasurer, is going to be talking about the governor's master plan on aging, another very important conversation for us. And on September 22nd, just 6 weeks or so out from the 2020 elections, we are very pleased and honored to have Robert Reich, who will be speaking about his observations about the upcoming election. In addition to being on the board of Ashby Village and working on this arts and culture series, I'm also the co-convener of Elder Action, which is a social justice interest group within Ashby Village. If you would like to know more about Elder Action, you can send us an email to elderactionnow@gmail.com. That's one word, elderactionnow@gmail.com. And now I want to introduce Rochelle Lefkowitz, my co-conspirator in all things at Ashby Village. Rochelle and I have been working together since she joined the board of Ashby Village 4 years ago. Together, as I said, we created the Arts and Culture series. Together, we created the interest group, social justice interest group, Elder Action. Prior to joining the village, among her many, many accomplishments, Rochelle was the founder and principal of Pro Media, which was a social justice communications firm that helped countless numbers of individuals and organizations shape and share their messages. In addition to that, Rochelle is a part of our communications team in Ashby Village, together with Julie Freestone, and she is also the editor and contributed to an anthology about women and poverty in the U.S. entitled For Crying Out Loud. Rochelle?
Thank you, Marcia, for that introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. We're really glad that you could join us today for an afternoon with Pulitzer-prizewinning columnist and novelist Connie Schultz, who is the author of a new best-selling novel, The Daughters of Erietown. I first met Connie Schultz through my son, Josh Kramer, who for the past 9+ years has been working in Washington, D.C. to raise funds to help re-elect senators, including Schultz's husband, Ohio's Senator Sherrod Brown. Josh encouraged me to approach Connie Schultz a number of months ago to speak as part of Ashby Village's Arts and Culture series, because he told me that Connie Schultz would be just the woman to guide us through the world that her novel draws us into. And these days, while we're sheltering in place, it's a challenge to get to know people who live beyond our homes and our neighborhoods. How can we come to understand their hopes and their heartaches, their hidden desires and long-kept secrets? How can we feel what they loved and what they've lost? How could we share their dreams and disappointments? Well, it turns out that fiction actually offers us a powerful and timely window into the lives that are unlike ours, lives that we sorely need to understand, respect, and appreciate more deeply. Fortunately, today we have the privilege of spending time with a writer who artfully enlists the mundane to shed light on the profound. She deftly creates characters that transcend the two-dimensional stereotypes that sometimes trip up other novelists. Connie Schultz's characters draw us close as they share what made them become themselves. Perhaps that's because the world that the Daughters of Erietown was, in many ways, Connie Schultz's world. In the late 1960s and early 70s, she grew up in Ashtabula, Ohio, near Lake Erie, across from Ontario, Canada, about 50 miles northeast of Cleveland. Before the Civil War, Ashtabula was actually an important destination on the Underground Railroad. Enslaved people who were escaping could take ships from Ashtabula to Canada and to freedom. But when Connie was growing up there, Ashtabula's population was around 25,000. And due to a drop in industrial jobs since then, it's now just over 18,000. These days, Connie Schultz writes a weekly print column through Creator Syndicate and a column called Views for Parade magazine. She worked at the Cleveland Plain Dealer newspaper from 1993 to 2011. In 2005, Connie won the Pulitzer Prize for commentary. Judges praised her columns for providing a voice to the underdog and the underprivileged. She also won the Robert F. Kennedy Award for Social Justice Reporting and the Batten Medal that honored a body of journalistic work that reflects compassion, courage, humanity, and a deep concern for the underdog. A graduate of Kent State University, Schultz is now a professional in residence at the university's journalism school. She and her husband have 4 grown children and 7 grandchildren. And with their rescue dogs, Franklin and Walter, they live in Cleveland, Ohio, where Connie Schultz is joining us from this afternoon. She is the author of 3 books, Life Happens and Other Unavoidable Truths, also published by Random House, is a collection of her essays. And His Lovely Wife is her memoir of the successful 2006 Senate race of her husband, Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown. Today, Connie Schultz will be talking with us and listening to us as she discusses her 3rd book, her first novel, The Daughters of Erietown. Released just last month, it's already a New York Times bestseller. I found The Daughters of Erietown to be a powerful probe that helped me understand some important issues more deeply. From the dignity of work and the intergenerational traumas of domestic violence, to the shattered dreams from teenage pregnancies and the sacrifices that people make for their families. Schultz has that special blend of respect and kindness, of wit and wisdom that it takes to bypass stereotypes. And in so doing, she gives us a rare chance to know some deeper truths and moving stories of 3 generations of women in rural Ohio. Other authors have called her novel, The Daughters of Erietown, a big, warm, and moving story of unforgettable women who make and shape their families. It's been described as a deep exploration of the inner lives of one family that reveals how the mistakes of one generation get repeated or repaired by the next. And they've praised how she shares the small moments in her characters' lives that shape them for better and worse. So we're proud and grateful that this eloquent writer has agreed to share her afternoon and her insights with us today. And now, please meet Connie Schultz, the author of The Daughters of Erietown.
Rochelle, that is such a generous introduction. Thank you. And one of the things I have never heard anyone give such a deeper history of my hometown, Ashtabula. That made me feel so proud in that moment. So many people have described Ashtabula as the place they go by on Interstate 90 on their way to somewhere else. But it was where I was born and raised. And Erietown, the Erietown of the Daughters of Erietown, is based a great deal on Ashtabula, although my editor had great advice at the time when she said, don't make it Ashtabula because people there, they'll all tell you what you got wrong. So I made it the town of Erietown, but it very much like Ashtabula, Erietown is a working class town on the shore of Lake Erie, full of working class people, and that is certainly the town of my roots, and these are the people of my roots, but the characters themselves are fictional. And yes, your son Josh, I just have to say this, you know, we consider him the son we didn't have. We have 1 son, 3 daughters, loved him dearly, but Josh has become such a part of our family over the years. So thank you to you and Felix for the gift of Josh as well. As I tried to explain earlier, we were not online yet. I find speeches by authors can be pretty tedious, especially fiction writers. And I didn't want to put all of you through that. So I thought what I would do is read a short passage from my book that to me, I hope, captures some of the essence of it. And then Rochelle and I are going to engage in conversation for a while, and then we're going to take questions from all of you. And thank you. I can't believe you're here on a Sunday afternoon to spend time with me. So I am really grateful to you for that. Thank you. One of the benefits of this has been such a horrible time, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who's on here today who's lost somebody to COVID-19. One of the blessings that's come out of this is that authors like me have actually been able to reach a lot more readers than we normally would. I've done so many more events than I would have done on the book tour that had originally been scheduled. So I'm really grateful for the chance to have a conversation with all of you. This passage that I'm going to read from my novel takes place between 2 of the main characters, Ellie McGinty And at this point, Ellie is in her 50s, and we've been following her since she was 9 years old. And it's with her grown daughter, Samantha, whom everyone calls Sam. And they are driving in the car. Sam is driving. And Sam finally asks her a question about her parents' marriage that's been on her mind for many years. Mom, why did you put up with it? Why didn't you leave? Ellie looked down at her lap for a moment, then turned to face Sam. We want to think there are rules in life, that as long as we follow them, everything will be all right. And then God blows up your plans, blows them to smithereens. And you're left picking up the pieces and putting your life back together as best you can, because it's not about you. It's about your children and the life you've built, and not giving everyone a reason to see you as damaged goods for the rest of your life. I'm sorry, Mom, I shouldn't have brought it up. No, I'm glad you did, Ellie said. This has been hanging over us for years. She turned to face the front and took a deep breath. I need to say something else, Sam. It might help you, I think. Sam looked at her. Well, what is it? It's what I've learned about grief, Ellie said. Not just grief after a death, but the grief you can feel after something rocks your world. Grief is that monster that bangs at your door until you let it in and sit with it for a while. When you get bored with each other, the monster leaves. Sam relaxed her foot on the pedal and the car started to slow. I never thought of it that way. How long does it stay, the monster? That's not the question, honey. It's how long does it take you to answer the door and let it in? That's where the pain is. You have to open the door. You can always tell the people who won't. Shows up in their faces over time. The longer they wait, the longer the monster stands in their way, blocking all the good trying to find them. How'd you get to be so smart, Mom? Ellie shrugged. I've opened my share of doors, I guess. All right, Rochelle.
Well, it's actually hard not to pause and take a deep breath before engaging in this conversation after that. But let's dive right in. Why do you hate the term Rust Belt for Ohio and the Midwest?
I hate it because it sounds like all we are is a collection of damaged goods, and that we're outdated and we're past our prime, and there's no hope in the language of the Rust Belt. I understand that, and there are writers who disagree with me, writers from the Midwest, and they use it. I think of it in a similar vein to the reference of flyover country, that we're not worth really noticing. There's so much living that's going on in the heartland. There's so much living that's going on in the rest of America, as I think of it, that's not on the coast. And so that's why I object to the term.
Do you have a good substitute?
Ohio, Iowa, Minnesota. I'd rather they talk about the regions. I understand that some don't like heartland, as if the rest of the country doesn't have heart. Totally get that. I think what my greater point here is that none of us should be succumbing to cliches, right? Or to stereotypes when we talk about one another, because everyone is more complex than a label that makes it easy to, you will find, in my experience, most people who actually live here, I think of the stereotypes of California, for example, right? I could rattle off those for you so quickly, and it would offend everyone who's in California because it's such a complicated, complex state. So is Ohio. And when I remember when the Plain Dealer did a series, let's see, it would have been in 2004, leading up to the presidential election, and they called it was a weeks and weeks of reporting, and the series was called The Five Ohio's, because Ohio really is 5 distinct regions. I'm in the most liberal blue part of the state in Northeast Ohio. But if you go down to Hamilton County or to Appalachia, you're going to hear a lot of people talking in Southern accents. And it's all in the same state called Ohio. So you can see how these labels fail to describe the complexity of people, just as labels about women, stereotypes about men, stereotypes about particular groups fail to convey all that we are in any given moment.
And I'll get back to that a little later along, because seeing as we are mostly women listening to you today, and mostly women who are beyond middle age, we're interested in some of the disturbing images of women that do creep into the language too. But right now I want to ask you, how is writing a novel different from writing your 2 books of nonfiction?
It's different in a number of ways. When I reach an impasse in my writing on a novel, I can't do what I have always been able to do as a journalist, which is pick up the phone and interview someone or go arrange an interview or send them an email. I need a little more information. Basically, I have to send that to my brain. And I'm trying to figure out what's going to happen and how it's going to unfold. I was lucky in this way with my career in journalism. I've done a lot of serial narrative work. And that has helped me learn how to use the fiction writer's tools to tell a nonfiction story. So I had already had considerable training in foreshadowing, reconstruction, right, dialogue. So in that way, I was lucky. I'm also really used to meeting deadlines. So in that way, although I had to set them often for myself, one of my writing tips, I'm assuming we have some people among us who write or want to be writing. This is a candle, a little tea light, right? I light it and I make myself write until it has burned out, which gives me usually 3 to 4 hours at a time, which I need to do because I have to schedule the time. I have, as you noted briefly in your introduction, I'm a professional in residence. I'm a columnist. I'm married to a United States Senator, which is not a job, but it can sure feel like it. Not because of him, but because of the expectations of us sometimes. So if I wanted to be serious about writing fiction, I had to make the time to do it. On the other hand, May Sarton, and some of you may remember May Sarton, the poet, novelist, and I read all her journals back in 2004, 2005. I don't know how I first stumbled upon them, but I just fell in love with her writing. And one of the things she said has really stayed with me. She said, perhaps only in fiction can we be totally honest. And if that's the case, this is the most truthful thing I've ever written.
So how much, if any, of the Daughters of Erietown is actually autobiographical?
Well, some of it inevitably is, particularly one's first novel. I understand that that's the case, in that it's set in Northeast Ohio. The main professions of the two main characters, Ellie and Brick McGinty, are the professions of my parents, both of whom died in their 60s. My mom was a nurse's aide, and my dad was a utility worker. I picked those professions in part because I knew them best already. And I had to do a lot more research, particularly for utility workers, but I certainly had a frame of reference for it. And I knew what it was like to be a little girl thinking your dad made electricity by harnessing lightning and just hurling it to your house. So I went ahead and had Sam do that. But as you know, Rochelle, we talked about this a little before, there are moments in the book that come from life that I didn't know I was going to use until the moment hit me. One of those is there's a moment in the book, about 2/3 of the way in, when Ellie McGinty is frustrated with her husband because she thinks he doesn't really understand why she does what she does for a living and why she doesn't want to leave her job. He's got the opportunity of a buyout and he wants her to quit, but she loves being a nurse's aide. And so she, for the very first time in her life, goes into a restaurant all by herself. Understand these are all working class people, right? And she sits down and she makes a list of her job duties for her husband. And that list is a partial list of my mother's several pages of lists that we didn't find until after she died. And hers were 4 or 5 pages, and they haunt me, I must say. It was the only column I wrote where I made a reference to my novel because I don't know why she wrote them, and there were enough copies for all of us in the family. And I do wonder, did she think we didn't really appreciate what she was doing? It has occurred to me so many times in recent months that if my parents were alive and of working age, they would be essential workers right now. And nurses' aides are in particular at great risk doing their jobs. And so Ellie and Brick are also essential workers. I couldn't have anticipated the additional importance or additional layer of importance to that, of course, at the time I wrote this. But during this pandemic, I've been so mindful of that.
So in reading your novel, I found some other powerful images that spoke to me, having lived through the times of the Daughters of Erietown. Things like train cases and lunch buckets. What do they mean in your novel?
Well, you might see the train case. I have a blue train case down here. under the flowers there. And that is the train case that was the model for what I used in my book. Initially, I thought I was just going to mention a train case. When it became more important to the story, I had to have a train case from the 1950s. So I did what is so easy to do these days. I don't remember if I found it on Etsy or on eBay, but I found one that was made right around the time Ellie was given this by her Aunt Nessa. And the train case represented something very big. And as it's turned out, I'm finding out it's represented something very big for a lot of women in America. I've probably heard more about that train case than anything else I could think of in terms of triggering stories from women about their own lives or about the lives of their mothers or their grandmothers. Because the train case was about leaving home. The train case was about adventure, perhaps, a chance to explore in your own life. And it was a pivotal moment for Ellie to be getting this because she had one person in her life in 1957 who thought she could be more than a wife and wanted her to consider this because Brick was facing the opportunity that no boy his age had ever had in their little town in Clayton Valley. He was getting the chance to have a scholarship to go to Kent State. And by the way, there's a letter from the coach of Kent State to Brick offering with bus ticket to get there. And that also was something that we discovered after my father died. He had gotten that letter and of course never took the bus ride. It helped me understand finally why my father insisted I was going to Kent State. He would never tell me that. And why my father smoked Kent cigarettes, which made me decide, you know what, so will Brick, because that makes perfect sense. You're never going to tell your kid why it mattered. It's going to be your big secret, but you will always cling to who you thought you could have been if life hadn't interrupted.
In that way and in so many other ways, you write so respectfully and movingly about working people. Can you talk with us some more about that?
That means a great deal to me that you said that. One of them, some of the most meaningful emails I've gotten have come from working class people or people with working class roots. Some of them who are working class, who thank me. I think of one person in particular who said, thank you for giving us decent grammar, for letting us have all our teeth, for letting us be complicated. Not all of us are racist. Certainly some of them are, and I absolutely needed to depict that. That was my own experience growing up. I mean, part of what I was trying to show with this novel is it's true of no matter how you grow up, our roots are our beginnings, but they're not our excuses. At some point, we have to decide who we will be, and we determine that for ourselves. And I grew up, I mean, my mom was such a stickler for proper English. Neither of my parents had gone to college. I was the first in my family to go to college. But that doesn't mean they weren't smart. And it doesn't mean I didn't know an awful lot of smart people growing up. And I'm so tired of these stereotypes of working class people. This novel came about, not because I came up with the idea. Right before my second book came out in 2007, my editor at Random House, Kate Medina, and the publisher of Random House invited me to New York for a lunch. And what they basically said to me was the working class is really underrepresented in modern literature. And we think you could do something about it. I agreed with the first part. I definitely thought the working class was underrepresented. And if they do show up, they're props or they're oafs, right? Or they're waiting on somebody and they're stupid and then they immediately send on their way. They're the hapless fools. I just didn't imagine myself being the person who could do anything about that. And it took me a while, considerably. When you think about it, this was 2007 and my book came out this year. So clearly it took me a while. The biggest hurdle for me was believing that I could write a novel. I've always had such high regard for fiction and for novelists. And I love being a journalist. I've been a journalist for more than 30 years. But once I believed I could do this, and what really finally got me there is thinking about the regret I would have if I didn't try. And because I really try to limit the number of regrets in my life, when at least I can do something to prevent that, that's what I think finally got me going. And I just started writing. But I will tell you, the first time, when I turned in the draft, my agent read it, and then she sent it to Random House, who'd been waiting for it, but there had been no deal yet. I was in an airport waiting for a flight. I think I was going to Washington to join Sherrod from Cleveland, and my agent called and said, "Congratulations, you've just sold your first novel to Random House. How does it feel to be a novelist?" And I started to cry. I was so excited. And this wonderful woman who had to be at least a decade older than me, as soon as I stopped talking on the phone, She hands me very gently a tissue and she says, I think it was good news, but you are definitely smearing your mascara. It was such a wonderful moment. It was so meaningful to me to actually be called a novelist and to know that this book was going to happen.
Well, given that, and given your comment a little while earlier about racism within the community that you grew up in, there is a Black woman who welcomes one of the characters in your novel to her new hometown. Would you say that that scene was true to life at that time?
I definitely knew it to be my experience. First of all, Erietown, like Ashtabula, was segregated in terms of going down to the harbor, which is closer to the lake and the port. Black people in the 60s, most of them would not dare have gone down there at the time. And I grew up, a lot of people don't know this about Ashtabula or towns like Ashtabula, but half of my elementary classes, all through elementary school, half my classes were full of Black students. So I learned at a very young age that you can see yourself in someone else without them having to look like you. That's how they become your friends. And certainly that has affected the trajectory of my career. I've been writing about race all of my career as a journalist. And I wanted to show that because that's not uncommon in smaller communities. I grew up in a Black neighborhood. I grew up on Route 20 in Ashtabula. And so that's where I ended up putting Sam. And there was real tension between my father and me over that. And so I wanted to show that with Sam and her father. Brick is very different from my dad in many ways. But it's interesting, working on a novel like this helped me understand a few things about my parents. And one of them was the tension with my father over Motown. But I got it that it was more, I think now it was more than just that it was a lot of Black artists and he was angry that I liked that music. Because like Brick, my father got me my first record player, and we used to go together to Hill's department store and buy, Dick Clark 5, Neil Diamond, the Beatles. We'd sit on the floor together when I was a little girl. And because my dad was only 20 when I was born. So he was into popular music, and I would listen to music with him and get so excited. But then, like Sam, when I hit 11, 12, 13, I discovered CKLW, the Motor City, and it was great, and I could listen to Motown all the time, and it caused a real division. But I realized I'm going to give my father credit for this part. He was losing me. He was losing something we had in common, and I only figured that out in writing about Brick, because Brick had to be more complicated. I wanted him not to just simply be a guy who's always struggling with race, because he loved his daughter, and he was far gentler with his daughter than my dad was. But I wanted to show the complexities of that. And even though Brick couldn't admit it to himself, there's a scene, I hope, that portrays where the reader, I remember my agent calling me at one point when she was reading the first draft, and she said, I am so mad at Brick right now. I like him, but he keeps pissing me off, and I'm just going to have to give up on him, and I don't want to. That's one of those moments, I hope, is when, even as he's thinking about how much music matters to Sam, it doesn't occur to him that if he would just embrace the Motown with her, he could get her back. He's incapable of it.
So given that we're talking about relationships between parents and children, there are a lot of women's friendships that are also in this book. And I wondered what you find is the same today about women's friendships as you depict them in the Daughters of Erietown.
Well, I love women. I've always loved women. I have always been bolstered, emboldened, and supported by my female friends. And I knew my mom had the canasta club. Before she went to work, she had the coffee clutch. They would take turns. I saw how important it was because, as was so often the case in the working class, but certainly I can see it in many of my friends' lives who are not working class, their husbands have their worlds, right? And back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, the men were not really including women in much about their lives. My father never wanted to talk about his job with me. He would complain about the manager sometimes. He was a strong union guy. But I had no idea what he did. Until he died, I didn't fully understand his job. Until I got a tour of the plant 5 years later by one of his former supervisors and found out more about his work. So women really supported one another and needed one another. because they were the holders of their secrets. They were the ones they could confide in. They helped with one another's children so much. That was true of me. I was a single mom for a decade. And what would I have done without the support of my friends while I had this full-time job? And it was not a conventional job. I was a reporter at that time, and crazy hours sometimes. And I've always wanted, I celebrate what women bring to one another and to the world. It's not just to each other. That's what we get underestimated and about, I think, is what we can contribute to the world. I remember reporting a lot in the 90s about how the research that was showing that when men, the difference in how men and women get into politics, for example, a man will see somebody on stage and think, oh, I could do that. A woman waits until someone says, you know, you've been great as PTA president, or you were wonderful at the church bazaar. Have you ever thought about running for city council, county commissioner? It never even occurs to women to do that, to be able to envision themselves like that. And so I'm at this point, I just turned 63. I would say all of my life, I've been an observer of women and how they function. And my career would not have been possible without the support of women. I had men getting in my way a lot. I had a wonderful male editor, Stuart Warner, but most of my promotions, and certainly my final opportunity when I finally became a columnist, after years of it, the male editor saying to me at one point, Connie, I don't think you have it in you. That was just how dismissive he was. It took a woman advocating for me, my department head, for him to finally agree. And when I got it, I went down to thank him, and he said, well, just so you know, I don't think we need another columnist. And at that point, you can imagine I'd really had it. And I just said, well, I'm just glad you got out of the way. And I walked out of the office. So I thought, no, okay, I'm not done with that. And then, of course, it turned out I could write a column. I did have it in me. And because of my own story and my own experience, I look hard into the potential of other women. I see it everywhere. And I so often, when I can be very, people don't believe this except my really close friends, but I can be quite shy. And when I go into a room, if I don't know very many people, or if it's overwhelming, like a political event for Sherrod, I'm just like, ah. One of the things I like to do is just say to someone in front of me, tell me about yourself, which to me is first of all, it's genuine. I already know all about me. The difference is if you ask a man, he can 20 minutes later, he's still going often. That's nothing against men. It's just men are confident about talking about themselves typically. Women so often begin their answer with, well, I'm just. And my favorite example of that's when a woman said, well, I'm just an ER doctor. And I said, oh, wow, what a slacker you are. I mean, just the concept of that and thinking that wouldn't be particularly impressive, right? So we have work to do in how we present ourselves and how we talk about ourselves.
And we also have work to do as we age, how others talk about us. And I was wondering if you had, because of being now a novelist and being really taken with imagery, do you see some particularly disturbing images of women as we age?
Well, yes. I did a TEDx talk in the fall of 2016, right before the election. And it was all about women over 50. And my operating premise was essentially this, that ours was the first generation of women who decided that we were not going to be invisible and irrelevant at the age of 50. And I gave so many examples of my own friends who have done, including a friend who went to medical school at 40, wasn't going to be, and she says to me at that point, her name's Gayle McCracken, and she said, Con, I'm going to be 50 before I'm a doctor. And I said, well, you're going to be 50 anyway, so why not be 50 and a doctor? And she's 68 now and still practicing. I mean, I know so many women, like, she's also working class roots, first in her family to go to college. So I think part of what has to change if we want people to talk about us differently at this age is we must talk about ourselves differently at this age. And we must not be casting ourselves as irrelevant. We should not be waiting for permission to share our opinion. That's never going to come frequently. And we need to be quite vocal and outspoken when people disrespect us. I mean, I thought Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did it exactly right last week when Congressman, and I said this on MSNBC during an interview, that, you know, that was a horrible thing that Congressman Yoho called her, treated her terribly, did not give her a real apology. And the expectation of him and other Republicans was that she would just let it go, move on. And what I love was her message, permission denied. I will not let it go. And what she did is so important. She carried as she climbed, which is what I think of for our generation so often. I don't think we have to step aside, but we have to make room for women who are younger. And this is a chance for us to share the wisdom. But first, you have to acknowledge that you have it. One of the reasons I love talking about this book, one of the few reasons I miss not being in rooms full of women is because when I give speeches with rooms full of women, and I ask, how often do you like my mother's list that she made? What's your list? How often have you told even the people who think they know you best, who claim to love you best, do they even know why you do what you do? Do they know your story? Have you ever felt you could tell anyone your story? Not only do I see a lot of heads nodding, but I see a lot of eyes tearing up. And that's part of it, the inherent modesty, the inherent belief, unfortunately, too often that, well, who would want to hear what we have to say? I think being a columnist now for 18 years has helped me overcome that, because you can always think, well, who's going to care what I have to say about something? I've really moved on past that. I've just decided you're going to hear what I have to say about this. And if you don't like it, I'm okay with that, but I'm going to feel better if I've let you know what I think.
Well, and also what I've really appreciated about you is you not only let people know what you think, but you listen to what they think. And so it occurred to me to ask you this afternoon, if you've had any small gatherings with women in Ohio recently, would you be able to share anything about women's thoughts in your swing state about the political climate?
I think Ohio is in play for exact reason. There's so many other places in the country are in play right now. Keep in mind, let's talk politics for a minute, because I never tire of that. It's certainly a part of my life, and it was long before I knew Sherrod. I grew up in a union home with the Jack and Jesus wall, which is in the book. Mom said she put her faith in Jesus. Dad said, you go right ahead. I'm going to put my faith in the Democrats. And they were side by side on our wall for many, many years. Women object to this discourse. Women object, to give you an idea of how deeply I think this is going. When Sherrod ran for re-election in 2018, 2 years after Trump won the state, right? And Trump won by a little over 8. Sherrod won it a little over 7. We knew that my very liberal husband had to have some Trump voters peel off and vote for him. We were pretty certain some of them had never left him. But we held focus groups with Trump voters throughout 2018. We always broke it by gender, men and women. These are the focus groups where you're behind a window, they can't see you, and you can watch them. And one of the things that was fascinating to me is the men were lost to us. 2 weeks after John McCain died, 2 different men said he wasn't really a hero because he got captured. And that was right out of Donald Trump's playbook. But the women started peeling off. And I remember the consultant sitting next to me said he had never heard Trump voters before say, I wish I had never voted for him. And they were peeling off then in 2018 over 2 issues, family separations and healthcare. Healthcare. Imagine where we are right now. And the thing is, this is such a horrible time, particularly for people over 50. And you can't undie people. You can't heal them from the consequences of having survived, but having for the rest of their lives health complications because they had COVID. He can't change that. And that alone makes me think more and more women are not going to be voting for Donald Trump. And more importantly, they're going to be voting for Joe Biden. And the polling is starting to show that. And I know some get very nervous about polling. I never publicize it on any of my social media accounts because I don't want people to get complacent about voting. But it is inaccurate to try to simply say, well, we were wrong in 2016 with polling. These are very different election years. And we do have to be vigilant, especially about, to me, it's all about turnout. Turnout. It's got to be a landslide. And I think in Ohio, we are seeing such movement. And all of a sudden, the Biden campaign's on the phone with my husband because they know Ohio's in play.
Thanks. Let's get back to your novel for a minute. How would the Daughters of Erietown have been different, do you think, if you had written it in your 30s rather than in your 60s?
Well, I doubt, first of all, that I would have written it while my parents were alive. But more to the point, I had a lot of living to do yet. And I'm not suggesting that younger novelists don't have great stories to tell. I just mean for me personally. I didn't have the confidence in my 30s, first of all, to have done what I did here. I didn't know. One of my dearest friends was a book editor for years and years and years, book, at a newspaper. And she said, "My God, I had no idea you were doing this saga. It's this epic." And I said, "Neither did I. I didn't realize that was supposed to be unique. I just thought, I've waited this long. Let's really blow it out and have all these different characters and time frames and stuff." I just think, first of all, I was a single mom in my 30s. So I was so focused on, my son was grown, but my daughter was young. And I just posted something on Twitter a couple of days ago showing a picture of myself at my electric typewriter in a row, 1980s glasses, 1980s big hair, with my 9-month-old baby on my lap. And I said, at that time, I often thought, what am I doing to her to have this, ambition? I juxtaposed it with a picture of that baby who's now in her early 30s, advocating for families and children. And she was testifying before the Rhode Island State House with her baby strapped to her chest. And I said, and I had a point to it, that I see so much anguish right now from parents, particularly mothers, who are working full-time at home with young children. And we never have to apologize for our ambition, and that you are doing everything you can for your children, and it's enough. That's what I learned from that my guilt was really wasted. And so I needed to learn that very directly to have the voice of confidence I have now. And that, because I'm a verified account, I can look at how many, it's like 2.6 million now on Twitter. And for that post, different interactions, impressions, which really stunned me until I thought it through. I mean, we've got 4 parents, our kids all have young children at home. And this has really been a challenging time for them. And I'm sure that many who are listening right now have children and grandchildren involved and know just how difficult these times are right now for their families.
I think one of the things that you talked about not long ago here in this conversation was about regrets and about things that you were really wanting to reduce in your life. Here's a question about a small one. Are there 1 or 2 things that you're sorry you had to leave out of this novel?
50,000 words worth, because that's how much I had to cut. Why did it never occur to me to ask somebody, how long is a novel on average? Because I never count words, I look at pages. So I turned in 197,000 words. And my editor, who is just masterful at so many things, she said, yes, well, one of the things that we would like to talk to you about is the average novel is about 110,000 words, and you've turned in almost 200,000 words. So there were some major cuts that had to happen. My book ends up being about 122,000 words. But I don't feel like it's missing anything ultimately. That was the thing. I'm used to revising and cutting, not quite at that level. Some things I have that I think I might be able to work into the next novel, which is not a sequel, but will be in Erietown, I think. And a couple of the characters may pop in different ways. I think there's going to be an independent bookstore run by a grandmother there. But overall, the book is where I wanted it to be in the end. And they gave me the time and the freedom and the flexibility to get it there.
Well, I feel like, at least in the questions that I had, that I was curious about, I've come to a place where I'm ready, and I bet you are too, to hear some of the questions in the chat from lots of other people who have been listening patiently, but have things on their minds as well. So Irene, I wonder if you can take over now and read Connie some of the questions from the chat.
I can. Thank you, Rochelle. And thank you so much, Connie, for choosing to share your afternoon with us. I'm sure everybody agrees that spending this time with you has been an absolute pleasure. And it's
thank you.
To know you as a novelist, as a woman, as a person, as a wife and mother. It's just been great. It's just been great. We've got lots of questions for you. So I'm going to start with the first one. First one is, I've been trying to diversify my reading these past several years, and I can't remember reading a book with so many redheads in it. It takes me back to my Norman Rockwell youth. Any comments?
Well, my dad was a redhead. So, and I decided Brick has the name in part because he's a redhead and he's built like a brick when he's a kid. And I'm Irish, and a lot of Irish have red hair. So it never even occurred to me. My editor said the same thing. She goes, my God, he's redheaded. Riley's redheaded. And I said, right. Riley's his son. He said, well, and Paul Wells is right, because Paul Wells is his son. Is Charlie going to be a redhead too? And I said, that's kind of how it works often. You have more than one redhead in a family. So that's how that happened. It just, I have grown up with a lot of redheads in my life. So I don't really read many redheads, except when you're reading novels, particularly out of Ireland. They'll often have red hair. And I thought, well, let's do it. That made me laugh. Thanks.
Let's see now. Our next guest has a comment, and she's asking if you're familiar with Peggy McIntosh and her work on racism.
The Invisible Knapsack, right? The Invisible Knapsack?
Yes.
Yes.
For our guests, it's called White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. And our guest is recommending it to anyone who feels they may not be a racist, and she'd like a comment from you on that.
I think that no matter who we are and what our backgrounds are, we can benefit right now in reading more of the work, certainly like that particular book by Peggy McIntosh, but there's so much else out there right now. And I'm impressed by how booksellers have embraced this, publishers have embraced this in terms of front-loading books that they had already published. We're seeing a lot of books that have been out there for quite some time. We're back on the bestseller list. But I want to see greater change. I want to see more authors who are Black and Latino and Asian being authors who are paid decent advances so that they can spend the time they need to write and not hold down 2 other jobs while they're doing it. So I'm optimistic about it. I think the books are easy to find right now. If you don't know what to read next, just go to the New York Times bestseller list right now in nonfiction and you'll see some of it. The conversations are important, and it's inherent. I think it's natural for a lot of people to feel defensive about them. But that doesn't get us very far. And when you, Rochelle, you asked earlier about one of the Black characters in that book. And yes, my experience was very similar because I knew so many, my Black classmates, I knew their moms, and I would go to their churches sometimes, which were so much more interesting than our Presbyterian church. The experience of being exposed to people who don't look or sound like you, who don't have lives like you, almost always benefit you. They benefit us. Let's make it about us, right? It enlarges our worlds. And we can't be afraid of the conversations in that. I mean, my daughter's married to an El Salvadorian refugee. His family came here in the 80s. He's a US citizen now. This alone has so informed our family's experience. Their children are 4 and 2, and he has stopped speaking Spanish to them in public in Rhode Island because of the stereotype. This is before the pandemic, because of the way some strangers were responding in the grocery store, for example. And of course he speaks English very well, but they want their children to be bilingual, which I think all children at this point should be raised to be that. So there's so much work to be done, and each of us has a role in this, and it doesn't matter how long we've lived. As I tell my students all the time, if you never are scared, you've stopped growing. And it can be very scary to admit to things that we have done wrong or to viewpoints we've had that we realize now need to be challenged. But if we don't do that, we freeze in time.
Let's see, one of our guests wanted to thank you for your courage in sharing your first novel, and he identifies himself as a self-published poet.
The poets. I love poets.
Other comments, I'm enjoying this so much, great. Okay, there we go. Somebody was complaining about having an echo on her end. I think we've gotten to the end of the chat box questions. I do want to remind everybody that, and I'll take this opportunity to do it, if you'd like to purchase a copy of Connie Schultz's book, you can find the book at any one of the following independent owned Pegasus bookstores in Berkeley or Oakland, and you can call them at 510-649-1320, or you can reach them online at shattuck@pegasusbookstore.com, all lowercase letters. I have a question of my own, Connie. I particularly appreciated reading a book called Waking Up White by Debbie Irving. And I wonder if you've read that book, and if you have, what your thoughts are.
I'm sorry, but I have not read that particular book. I mean, I've spent, I will tell you, I teach ethics. One of the courses I teach is ethics. And when I found out last semester that all but 3 of my students were not journalism majors, but were what we call digital and media production, I thought it's not going to work to teach journalism ethics this class, and all but 1 were male. And I had a number of Black students, which I'm always so grateful when that happens, because it just enriches the conversation. It forces some of these conversations. I decided that instead of assigning it, I don't require my students to buy textbooks. I subscribe to so many different services. I feel like I can produce the material for them, so they don't. A lot of my students are just like I was, first generation college kids. What I had us read instead, because I had just seen the movie and I'd already read the book, and I know Brian Stevenson a little bit, I had them read Just Mercy.
Oh, wonderful.
And what an eye-opening semester to watch the white students, in particular, many of the white men, had so little familiarity with the criminal justice system, and especially in how it affects particularly Black men. And I had worked on a series called The Burden of Innocence. It had been a year-long reporting series of a man named Michael Green, who had gone to prison for 13 years for a rape he did not commit. Which is, unfortunately, this is your typical person behind bars who's innocent. It's Black, male, living in poverty, perhaps never finished high school. In other words, they're very vulnerable. Racism is always at work. So I was familiar with all this because I had worked on that series in 2002. It was published in 2003, and it was a Pulitzer finalist. And it was the reason I won the Robert F. Kennedy Award that Rochelle mentioned earlier. What I couldn't get over was that in 2020, how many white students still had no familiarity with what was happening with our criminal justice system and racism, having no idea yet what was coming, right? So what I learned from that is the only way, I think, in a way I was able to do this, I didn't let anybody know I was going to do it except the students. And I had a couple years earlier, you all know the Ruby Bridges. Somebody mentioned Norman Rockwell earlier. Remember the Norman Rockwell painting of Ruby Bridges being escorted by federal agents to integrate the school? And most of my students who were white had never seen that painting, which I only found out when a conservative cartoonist swapped out Betsy DeVos for Ruby Bridges. I hit the roof. And I wanted them to see both, and we talked about the ethics of it, but most of them had never seen that painting. So in my office on campus, I have a large canvas reproduction of it hanging in my office. And what I love is how many students will come in. I love young people. I can't be around them enough. If they don't know what it is, they ask so often. And then we have a conversation about Ruby Bridges. And we have a conversation about segregation. And you know how this works. Then it segues into what's happening now in the country. We have to be open, and we have to meet people where we find them. I could just be really judgmental of my students who didn't know anything about that, but who would be to blame in that? More me than them, right? Because this is my opportunity to help them learn. And of course, I don't need to tell anyone who, especially those of you who know young people, love them, or work with them. Wow, it keeps me so current on so much. I would not be who I am right now as a writer, even if I weren't so surrounded by them on a regular basis.
You know, Irene, I've seen a couple of more questions that just
I'm looking at them right now. Thank you.
Sure. One of them was someone asking whether, Connie, you had any particular thoughts and recommendations about learning how to open doors to grief.
Well, my mom was a hospice home care worker in the last few years of her life. And I've done a lot of work as a journalist on death and dying issues. I don't really know current authors that much. I found the Buddha, I'm not Buddhist, I was raised Christian, but I have found Buddhism particularly helpful. And I've turned to it again now because one of the concepts that I remember learning is if we contemplate daily our death, the inevitability of our death, we can more fully live. I think the coronavirus has really forced us, many of us, to consider, I didn't think I would, on so many levels, this matters to me. My mother died at 62. So this 63rd birthday for me was monumental. I can't overstate it. To outlive my mother in this way. And she's been gone 20 years now already. But I didn't think at 63 that I would have to be contemplating so vividly. Every day we're faced with things we must do to make sure that we can stay alive, that we don't get this virus, right? I think the Buddhists were right then and they're right now about this. But the mindfulness of that, I think also can help with grief. The monster at the door really came from personal experience, particularly after my mother died. And there's just no avoiding the grief. You can try to deny it, you can try to put it off, but as it turns out, it's seeping into everything you're doing. And it's tainting your vision over time. It's getting in your way of experiencing new things. And the older we get, the more this is going to happen. I lost one of my oldest friends in the last couple of months. And I also lost Annie Glenn to COVID. And John and Annie were two very dear friends of ours. And it was very hard for me to imagine that she had to be alone with strangers as she was dying, because that's how it works. So I'm sure there is new stuff being written out there. I guess I've stopped having to seek it out so much because I've spent so much time writing about it, working on death and dying issues. I always think of the old joke, the hospice joke, that the hospice nurse shows up at the door and the family, let's say it's a daughter opens the door and says, he's back there, he's dying, but he doesn't know it, so don't tell him. And the nurse goes back and he says, close the door, please. He says, I'm dying, but they don't know it, don't tell them. And I think of my mom when she was in the last 2 weeks of her life. And I asked her if she was scared or wasn't she angry? And she just said, oh, honey, I know things you can't know yet. It's not your time. And that has given me comfort in so many ways over the years.
It strikes me that it's pretty stark that people who are 35 and 45 might be close to their time because of what we're going through.
Yeah.
Another comment, I would very much love to have her definition of grief right now. I loved hearing her. She's amazing. She's our new heroine.
Oh.
And another comment, you're a real inspiration. I'm close to 70, and even though I'm not a writer, I thought it would be important for my children and grandchildren to know about where I come from. Just 100 pages or so to let them know who I was, what was my story. I became a US citizen only after my second child was 4 years old. I'll be sure to read your book.
I'm so glad to hear that. I don't know if this is a man or a woman who did this. I would encourage all of you to do this. Please do not assume nobody cares to know your story. And the thing is, how many of us outlived parents and wish we had asked some questions, wish we had talked to them about certain, because when you're young, there's so much going on in your life and you're busy. Never ever think that someone's not going to care. And also, as a writer, I'm going to say this, the process of writing can be restorative, and it can help you understand yourself. I often say when I'm working out a column, I don't know exactly what I think about this issue until I've had to research it and write it and let you know what I'm thinking. I'm just such a believer in the power of writing.
There was another lighter question, Irene, that I saw as well by someone who said, did you want us to like the character Brick?
Yes, that was my next stop.
Well, I wanted you to see the potential in him, that he's complicated. When I turned in my first draft, my editor said that Brick was the most fully realized character and that I had to do more developing of the other ones. And when she said that, I thought, now, how did that happen? And I think it's because I was writing about things that I really loathe in a person, sometimes the violence, the infidelity, that kind of thing. And yet I know that most of us are better and we're bigger than our biggest mistake. But the thing is, our biggest mistake can change who we are. And if we don't forgive ourselves, or if we don't have others to forgive us. And I wanted him, originally I had Brick be a violent man like his father. My editor said, then everybody's just going to hate him. And I think Brick's more complicated than that. Would you consider having him try harder? And at first I really pushed back on that because we know the legacy of domestic violence. But if I really mean it, that our roots are our beginnings, but not our excuses, this was a chance for me to show it. And it was a way to show how, for all his flaws, he does resolve that he will not be like his father in that way. And he does accomplish that. So there is a part of me that does care about him and wants you to care about him, but I fully understand when you're really disgusted with him too.
He's a fully fledged man.
I did have a male friend say to me, "Thank you for not making all the male characters complete jerks." And
Yeah.
I said, well, why would I do that? There are plenty of men I like in the world and admire in the world.
I will amend my comment to say a fully fledged human being. Thank you for talking about our daughters and covering all the bases, including education for their little ones. I'm at a loss as to the way to help. Any ideas?
So I want to make sure I understand the question. Is it help people in their life who have young children? Is that?
Well, she's talking about her daughters, and I'm assuming she's referring to her daughters that have little children, and she's at a loss as to the way she can help, and wondering if you have any ideas.
Boy, do I understand that feeling, because right now we can't see our children. I mean, when we can't see our grandchildren, by our children's dictate, because they want us to stay safe. And so we're not able to help. I mean, I would love to be flying in or driving in to Rhode Island or Columbus, Ohio or Chicago to be helping, but that's exactly what we're not supposed to be doing right now. So I will tell you what I do. First of all, I really appreciate that our grown children do. I was telling Rochelle earlier, my grandchildren know me so well, including in this break of time together, because we do FaceTime constantly. And I send books. I'll ask my daughter, what's the topic? What's the thing they're interested in? I send books. I just said to my daughter, though, our grown children need to feel our love and tending and our acknowledgement that we know how hard this is for them. And this is going to sound silly, but it so moved my daughter. I had ordered a couple plants from a company called Bloomsgate, and I really love them. One's a prayer plant. Do I have it here? No. A prayer plant, I don't know how many are familiar with it, but it actually folds up at night, and then it opens again, and it looks like painted leaves. So I sent her a picture of mine. It's pet friendly, kid friendly. You only have to water it once a week. You spritz it. I thought the kids would have fun taking turns spritzing. And I said, would you have an interest? I sent her a picture of it. Am I sending this to you? And I told her about it and where it could go. I couldn't get over her response. And I thought, I need to be doing more of these things with our kids. Just these little things, sending lotions to one of our daughters who loves the hand creams and stuff, and sending the particular little toys that the kids like that will be a distraction for them, and they can learn to count with them. But so in other words, I'm throwing resources more because I can't be the grandma I want to be. But also I send cards all the time to my kids now. Our oldest grandchild is 12. The next oldest is 7, to give you an idea of how long we had just the first one. And they were in St. Croix for 5 years. They moved there when he was 7. And so I used to write him letters all the time. I often do pop-up cards, like love pops. I love those things. I didn't know for 3 or 4 years that he would save them and he would sleep with them under his pillow.
Oh.
I know. When I heard that. So now I send my grandchildren cards a lot. I love pop-ups, and I write them letters. Sometimes I make cards out of photographs of them that their mother has sent, or pictures of Sherrod and me and the dogs, and I write little poems to go with it. And my daughter in particular, the youngest of our 4, is very good at taking video when they first open them. And the excitement that the children have, that they got mail and that they have these notes. And so it may sound small, but the thing is, it's the thing we're best at, is the little things that are the tending. And most of us remember that mattering to us when we were young. The good news, it still matters. As much as they love technology and they watch their, if a mouse has a cookie, wants a cookie, or all the Paw Patrol, all that, they still love feeling the connections with us. And there are things we can offer that no one else can.
Thank you very much. Someone wants you to know that they first met you in your columns for Parade magazine.
Yes, I wrote for Parade for 5 years. That we all got fired on the same day when it was sold. The day it was sold, they fired the publisher, the editor, and all of us. A couple remained, they brought them back, but the rest of us were gone for good. I loved it because it was, again, a chance to write for all of America, right? It's a different kind of reader who would pick up Parade. And back then it was a pretty thick magazine often still. And it was the first time, even though I have a syndicated column, well, it was kind of interesting because my essays, these were always personal essays. I often tried to have a sense of humor in them, and they would run on Sunday in Parade on the same day that many newspapers ran my columns about politics on their editorial pages. And one of my favorite emails I ever got from a reader was a man from Alabama, and this was during the presidential primary in, well, it would have been 12. He said, "I do not understand how a woman who is so sweet to her puppy can be so mean to Rick Santorum." And I wrote back and explained, well, women are complicated people and we can hold more than one thought at a time in our heads. And I loved his response. He wrote back and he said, "Well, now you sound like my wife."
Couple of people are wondering, is there a Kindle version of your book?
Yes, and there's also an audio version. Cassandra Campbell recorded it. She did Lilac Girls. She did, what's the one that's been on the bestseller list for so long? Crawdads, for the Crawdads sing. She did that one. They let me pick. They sent me several different people who are auditioning for it, but Cassandra wanted to do it, and she was good at multiple voices. She's a particularly gifted actor when it comes to reading. So yes, you can get it on your Nook, you can get it on Kindle, you can get it on audio, you can get it on Apple. It's everywhere. It's Random House. That's one of the advantages of being with Random House.
Thank you. Thank you. How about the Hillbilly Elegy as a different region of Ohio?
He and I have gone rounds on this one. I don't agree entirely with his depiction of it. He knows that. I mean, he and I, the author, J.D. Vance, and I on Twitter, I mean, certainly his book has been very popular. I don't consider mine a response to that. I consider mine more of a realistic appreciation of working class people with all our flaws. I don't romanticize them, but I also don't make them all sound really lost to us and pretty mean-spirited. But he at one point said he grew up in the Appalachian part of the state and he never knew anything about racism. And I said, oh, okay, I call BS on this. There is no way you didn't. And that's when I shared with us on Twitter, and I shared a link to my piece I did for The Atlantic about my dad's racism. And the thing I say often here is that, look, it's one thing, it's easy to hate the racist you don't know. It's quite different when it's somebody you love and who, in my case, was the reason I got to go to college. But it doesn't mean, and part of the reason I wrote the essay when I did, is I was getting tired of this depiction that if you come from the working class, you have to be a racist. And also to say working class, to assume it means white people, when at this point in this country, the majority of working class people are not white people. So how we talk about this really matters. But it worked for J.D. Vance and good for him. He did really well and they're making a movie out of it. So.
Okay. Well, let's see here. Someone is talking about the fact that, I think it's the same person that followed your columns in Parade. And she says that you handle the characters with such generosity and humor. It wasn't a humor which was laugh out loud, but rather a smile that touched those close and made her think deeply about the people and situations you chose to highlight.
Well, that means a lot to me because I didn't want punchlines and slapstick. That wasn't what I was going for. But even in the worst of times, I'm sure this is true of most of us on this discussion today. If you can't find the humor, you're going to lose your mind, right? And it goes back to me, for my women friends in particular. The people who know me best have known me for decades. And boy, the stories we have about one another over the years. And it can really help sometimes. Sometimes we just need to be able to laugh about something, no matter how bad it is. Because it's really, to me, it's linking us back to our humanity, our shared humanity. All is not lost. And as I constantly remind my students right now, this is not our forevermore, this time, this pandemic, but it sure can feel like it on many occasions. And I think when we can remember that there's a lot more to us than being victims of the pandemic, it helps us remain hopeful that this too, we will overcome eventually.
From Patrick Murray, I've recently read the book White Working Class by Joan Williams.
Oh, I know Joan. Yep.
You think it's a problem to try and describe groups of people and make generalizations about how the group thinks?
I think I didn't agree with Joan on everything, but I'll tell you what she really made me think about a lot. We had dinner with her one night after we read her book. I think she's right that it was wrong to talk about Hillary Clinton as breaking the glass ceiling, because most women never aspire to that. That's not what they're hoping is that they can support their families, that they can support in many families, that their husbands don't have to work 2 jobs and they work another job, that they don't have to worry about, will they ever be able to afford to send their own children to college? Will they be able to afford the dreams they have for their kids? This glass ceiling concept was pretty elitist, and it didn't speak to working class women. And in that, I can definitely see her point. But I would agree, we got to be careful always. I mean, I hope in Erietown, one of the things that readers who are not from the working class see is that they have a lot in common with a lot of these women, that hopes and dreams, nobody has a monopoly on that. The big difference is when you're from the working class, you still have hopes and dreams and aspirations for your children, but when the big problems come and you have no money to fix them, your world implodes.
There's another question about racism. When you encounter someone who clearly says racist things, how have you learned to talk to them about it?
Most of the time, it's in a public setting where they're doing it to somebody, to a clerk, and I will speak out immediately. But I also understand I have the stature at this point that if I'm, if not immediately recognizable, I'm going to make clear that I'm not moving because I'm going to be advocating for someone else. If it were family, I don't have that happen as much anymore. I always speak about it, but it can rear its head in different ways. Like I've had 3 different occasions in classrooms where a white male student will use the term colored people. That's shocking, right? To think that, but if they have not had the upbringing and apparently no exposure, and the thing is, every time it happened, it was in a classroom where I had Black students who immediately are looking at me like, do something right now, which they're right. And so how do you talk about this? What I try to do very calmly is say, all right, first of all, I want to talk about the term colored people. We don't use this. And it is racist to say that, and it is antiquated, and I always meet with them privately after, and I try to do a quick pivot and let's get to the point you were trying to talk about. And I often check in with my Black students to ask how they think that was handled, because I do think it really matters what they think in that moment. The thing that we have to do that I've talked about so much in the last few years, women of my generation were so often raised to be polite. We were raised to make people feel comfortable. We were raised when the conversation got awkward at the table, that's when we brought the pie. What's changed is we are also the influencers that we've never acknowledged about ourselves. And if we stop everything in that moment and say, all right, that is unacceptable. We do not talk about people that way. Think of the change, but it does require for a lot of us to get uncomfortable in ways. And we can do it in line at the drugstore. We can do it at the church potluck. We can do it at the reunion, at places where we are not accustomed to having these conversations. This is what has to change. I have so much faith in women. It's not that I don't have, I'm not even gonna say that. We talk about men plenty. I have so much faith in women. What I want is for women to have faith in themselves.
There is a comment here. Finding Meaning by David Kessler is an excellent book about opening to grief. So he wanted to share with us.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Oh, here's an interesting one. What would you do differently if you were the first lady? And is that a possibility? And could you please? That's my comment. Saying please, but I'm saying, well, could you please?
Well, certainly we had to consider all of this when Sherrod was doing his Dignity of Work tour. And we were weighing whether or not he was going to run, and then made the decision that he would not. I think there are so many ways to be, I do think this. I'm not going to try to be delicate about it. We need a first lady who actually sees the privilege of being the first lady of this country. And we need a first lady who understands that this is the people's house and that there's so much that can be done so quickly. I have a lot of faith in Jill Biden in this regard. I reviewed her book for the Washington Post, her memoir that came out a couple of years ago. I am convinced that when she wrote it, she did not think Joe was running. So much has changed, right? And she talked very candidly about how she has really struggled with her faith in the wake of their son's death. That she doesn't go to, at that point, she was not going to church, which was incredibly honest for somebody whose husband is in politics and who has had this political profile of her own. So often I've wondered, is it so bad right now that it's going to be almost impossible to right this ship once Trump is defeated? Or is it so bad that simply taking major public, very visible steps right away to restore the dignity to the office and to the family who is holding their place in the White House, can that really start changing things fairly quickly for us? I think there is such a yearning for warmth again from our leaders, from the White House. There's such a yearning for, my mom always said, like, I always wear, you see I'm wearing it, I have a linen jacket on. Authors are showing up in all kinds of things. I've noticed that because I've been doing talks with some of them, but my mom always said, when you show up, you represent, because you are representing the people you come from. And that's what I think of when I think of the White House, that you represent America and you need to act like it. And you need, and I don't know, I mean, I read Mary Jordan's book about Melania Trump. Mary Jordan is from Cleveland originally, and she's a Pulitzer-prize-winning journalist. And it's pretty eye-opening. If you had ever thought that Melania Trump was a victim of Donald Trump, I think we're done with that. She's very much on board with this. So we really need a different mentality. And I was not going to say anything, even though she had agreed with the birtherism early. I wasn't going to say anything about her until she wore that jacket when she was visiting migrant children in detention. I don't care, do you? And I was done with that. That's when I thought, this is so much worse. Even as bad as we thought it was going to be if he was elected, it's so much worse than we could have imagined. And so my answer I've decided is that it won't take that much in some ways to restore some faith in government if they do it right, but everyone has to be behaving better. And so, I'm optimistic. I think the Democrats are going to take back the Senate. This is normally a time, 2 years ago, I would have said, I'm sorry if I sound partisan. What I'm sorry for is that voting rights is a partisan issue. I'm sorry that racism is a partisan issue. I'm sorry that women's rights is a partisan issue. None of that should be. Workers' rights, none of this should be partisan issues. I'm not the one, we're not the ones. Those of us who are here today, we didn't make it a partisan issue, but it's crucial that we step up in this time and make clear what we do believe in.
Absolutely. Any thoughts about the VP for the Democratic ticket?
If I say this, I'm going to regret it. But yes, I have my favorite person, but I'm being very careful about that right now because first of all, I just don't operate in a vacuum on this one. And the next thing you know, Sherrod's they're going to ask him, do you agree with your wife? It's so-and-so.
Yeah.
And I'd rather not put him through that.
Do you think that it is important that Biden appoint a woman of color? I think
it's important that Joe Biden picked the best partner for him. I would love for it to be a woman of color. I don't think it's ever been as important as it is this time, who will be the vice presidential nominee. Joe Biden is a much older candidate. He's acknowledged that. We need to see clearly the leadership capabilities of the person he picks. Do we have an idea of when that's coming out, by the way? Do we know the announcement date yet?
I heard it was going to be sometime in August, but no particular date.
Yeah, I mean, I would be really disappointed if it weren't a woman. Let's start with that. But I also know that what we're dealing with in the country right now, and we've got to win. By any measure, what's most important is that we win.
I think he has committed that it's going to be a woman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I look at some of them out there. I'm a big fan of Tammy Duckworth. I don't know how familiar all of you are, but she is just, and I had the chance to interview her on stage a year ago in Cleveland. She was supposed to give a speech, and she asked, could I interview her instead at a women's summit that Sherrod sponsors every year in the state of Ohio in different cities. And that year it was in Cleveland. I watched her close the distance with that audience so fast. Women who were CEOs, male manicurists, hairdressers, secretaries. I have never seen anything quite like that. And
Yeah.
to me, she checks so many of the boxes that we are looking for, including being a veteran. Look what she has sacrificed for her country.
Yes.
She became a mother again at, was it 50 she was? And they had to make changes on the Senate floor so that she could bring her baby down on the floor. There's just so much about her that understands so much about America. That's not an endorsement, but I'm just giving it as an example.
Oh, yeah. Well, I have fantasies about her chewing up Trump and Pence.
How do you go after her? How do you go after her?
Exactly.
Right? She is.
There's no way. Somebody wants to know, is anybody talking to you about making the book into a movie?
Well, I gotta be careful here. It's a hard time right now to be making any concrete decisions on films because they really don't know what that's gonna look like right now. And there aren't as many pitches going on right now. So I'm just gonna leave it there for now. I mean, of course, my friends, my closest friends, they've been casting for months, all the different people they see in the roles, but that's what friends are for.
Well, let's see. I think we have, I see that we had about 100 people here. Just very nice.
Well, thank you. That's really nice. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. It's just been, again, an absolute pleasure and interesting and eye-opening and everything that you'd want to do on a Sunday afternoon. So very, very happy that you were able to join us and agreed to join us, and we'll look forward to your next book. Have you thought about your next book?
Oh yes, I'm already in the process of writing it, and it's, as I said, yes, it is a novel. It won't be a sequel. I don't rule out a sequel, but this is not going to be a sequel. I think it will be in Erietown, and I'm at this point seeing an independent bookstore that's run by a grandmother and her adult granddaughter, probably early 20s, has been having a time of it and comes to spend the summer with her. And I'm enjoying it. I like writing cross-generational, in case that hadn't come across after Erietown. I like looking at how generations one affects the other, how some respond differently because of what's happened in a prior generation. And I never run out of ways to write about women, as it turns out.
Good. Well, we so much appreciate you, and continued success and continued being the healer that you are.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who joined us today.
Well, I have a special thank you that I would like to send out to our Ashby Village staff member, Sue Yin. Sue Yin is a key partner for our arts and culture group. Her assistance is a great help to us in the production of these Zoom presentations.
She's been a magician for us.
Yes, yes, she is, for me as well. And yeah, there's an awful lot of planning going into these, and she's just been terrific. So we want to give her a good shout out here. And I think we're good. I think that we do want to remind you that Troy Duster will be joining us on August 16th. He's a sociologist and an Ashby Village member. Dr. Duster is a greatly admired and respected professor emeritus at the University of California, Berkeley. You'll see a full listing of his many academic and professional achievements in the invitation to his talk. Dr. Duster will be talking to us about the forces that are reshaping our nation's understanding of race. So we thank you for participating with us, all of our guests, Connie Schultz, all the other members of Ashby Village's arts and culture team. And we look forward to welcoming everybody back in August. Have a great rest of your day. Stay safe. Stay away from the ventilators. Thanks again.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.